Hi, fifth grade. Good morning. Sorry I can't be with you in person today. So you will not have a Google Meet. Hopefully you're seeing this, and I wrote this in Google Classroom as well, but you'll have a Google Meet today on Wednesday. That's Wednesday, October 28th. But you will have chapter 3, lesson 2 to complete. So we're going to start with that with the cooperation and conflict in North America. So let's go ahead and get that started. Make this a little bit larger so we can zoom in and read it. All right, so our essential question for lesson 2 then is, how did early European settlers compete with one another and the Native Americans? So there's competition among European nations. So this is the Europeans competing against one another now. Spain, France, and England had different approaches to colonizing North America. Each nation's monarchy hoped that the North American colonies would bring wealth and greater global power. The three major empires employed different economic and governmental systems. The colonies of New Spain and New France appointed governors who reported back to the controlling government in Europe and carried out the king's and queen's orders. The English colony at Jamestown, on the other hand, was governed in its early years by a group of people who were elected to represent each settlement in the colony. The three nations competed for land and trade. Spain and France also sought to convert the native peoples to Catholicism, the primary religion in those countries. So the people in Spain and France said, they got permission to go and explore and to go and settle, and saying, hey, we will convert the Native Americans into Catholics. And that's how they got their way over to North America. And that's what they said. They're going to try to convert the Native Americans to Catholicism. Looking at the picture below here, let's go ahead and take a look at it on the next page. Okay, and this is an early map of Quebec City and what is now modern-day Canada. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our overview of our timeline. So in 1545, we have Spain finds the largest silver deposits yet discovered in the Americas. In 1608, we have Samuel de Champlain founds Quebec City, which is the picture we just looked at. In 1649, the Iroquois Confederacy defeats the Huron Confederacy in the Beaver Wars. And then in 1718, we have Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne de Bienville founds the city of New Orleans. Spain established territories in South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and Mexico, as well as the southern and western parts of North America. Spanish settlers quickly learned to use the resources of their new colony to increase the wealth of Spain. The Spanish did not want land in the Americas to be taken by the French or the English. So, to further expand, Spanish rulers offered large portions of land to those willing to move to New Spain. These areas, called encomiendas, included any Native American villages on the land. The Native Americans living in an encomienda were forced to work for its owner in exchange for housing and food. While the early English relationship with the Powhatan in the Jamestown colony involved some instances of cooperation, Spain's relationship with the Native Americans was based on conquest. The Spanish also wanted to convert all native peoples to Catholicism. New Spain's wealth and power came in part from its gold and silver mines. Spanish settlers also built ranches and sugarcane plantations. Many of the workers in these mines on the plantations were Native Americans. Disease, mistreatment, and dangerous working conditions resulted in the deaths of about 24 million Native Americans in just 100 years. To replace the shrinking workforce, the Spanish brought enslaved Africans to New Spain. By 1570, more than 200,000 Africans were enslaved on the plantations of New Spain. Okay, so we went from 300 in Jamestown Colony to more than 200,000 Africans now enslaved in the plantations of New Spain. So huge numbers. Okay, so this is a picture of a mission, and a mission was a common type of settlement in New Spain. One Spanish colonist named Bartolome de las Casas was so upset at how the colonists were treating the native people that he decided to help them. He became a missionary, or a person who teaches his or her religious beliefs to people with different beliefs. Eventually, many more missionaries from Spain came to the Americas to teach the native peoples about Catholicism. Although the missionaries believed they were doing good, they forced the native peoples to work and give up their own religion. These native peoples and Spanish missionaries lived in settlements called missions. As Spain began claiming the West Coast, these missions became part of their story to prevent Russia and England from settling land in the present day California. So you can kind of see by looking at this map, if you look at where the Spanish lands were, that's all in the orange here, and how they were down in what is now Mexico and up the western coast of the United States into California. Okay, we have some French lands. That's the green here. We have the Spanish lands. We have the British lands. And we have the disputed or unclaimed by Europeans. That's the tan, whatever's not in the red, yellow, or the red, orange, or green. Okay, so the French had about 2,700,000 square miles. The Spanish were pretty close to that with about 2.4 million square miles. And then the English only had, or the British only had about 300,000 square miles. So much smaller than the other two. All right, so in the previous chapter, we talked a little bit about French trappers and traders, so about the French fur trade. So let's continue with that. We have French trappers and traders. When the French settlers began to colonize in North America, they were interested in finding gold and a route to Asia. Their settlements along with the St. Lawrence River in Canada would not help them with either of those goals. What Canada did offer was many fur-bearing animals. The forests of Europe had been overhunted, but Europeans still desired hats made from beaver fur. To meet European demand, French settlers began to export beaver pelts across the Atlantic. The money raised through the fur trade helped pay for more expeditions into North America. As French explorers continued to explore Canada, the King of France wanted to organize the colony to ensure it made money. He chose Samuel de Champlain to lead New France. In 1604, Champlain sailed to New France as its first governor. Champlain's strategy in North America differed greatly from that of the Spanish conquistadors. He felt that building friendly relationships with the groups of Native Americans would lead to successful trade. He believed these alliances would allow him to travel freely and keep the French settlements safe from attack. Within his first year in New France, Champlain learned to speak the Huron language. New France and the nearby Huron and Algonquin groups traded with each other and maintained friendly relationships. So let's go ahead and look at this primary source of Samuel de Champlain. So that's in his words. It says, "We departed on the following day, pursuing our way up the river as far as the entrance to the lake. In it are many beautiful low island covered with very fine woods and meadows with much wild fowl and animals to hunt, such as stags, fallow deer, fawns, roebucks, bears, and other kinds of animals which come from the midland to these lands." So he's talking about all the fur that you can see in the area that he's living in. Okay, now we have Marquette and Joliet. French explorers' efforts to find the Northwest Passage led them to further explore North America's waterways. In 1673, Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet headed south in a canoe on the Mississippi River, a river unfamiliar to them. They encountered many groups of Native Americans living on the banks of the Mississippi. While some Native Americans resisted when the colonists settled on their lands, the Illinois and other groups helped Marquette and Joliet. Marquette and Joliet claimed the land drained by the Mississippi River for France. Marquette later set up a mission in present-day Illinois, and Joliet continued to explore North America. So they were some of the first French explorers to explore on the Mississippi River and in the area that we know today, that we live in. So pretty cool. Then we have LaSalle and Louisiana. In 1682, René Robert Cavelier Sieur de La Salle led an expedition down the Mississippi River. La Salle claimed the Mississippi River and its tributaries, or smaller branching rivers and streams, for France. So any waterways that led into the Mississippi River, he claimed those for France. He named the region Louisiana after the French king, Louis XIV. La Salle wanted to build a fort at the mouth of the Mississippi and attack the Spanish in northern Mexico. La Salle and several hundred settlers, however, got lost and ended up in present-day Texas. By 1687, only 36 of La Salle's settlers remained alive. So there's a picture here of bark canoes that were sturdy enough to withstand ocean waves and light enough to be carried. So, good question here. It says, why did Champlain develop a friendly relationships with the Native Americans he encountered in New France? Why, instead of wanting to fight with them, did he want to have friendly relationships with them? All right, moving on to New Orleans. French colonists slowly began to settle parts of the Louisiana Territory. They built forts in strategic locations to protect new settlements from the Spanish and English. Louis XIV instructed a Canadian naval officer, Pierre Le Moyne Sieur d'Iberville, to build forts at the mouth of the Mississippi. The series of forts he built in present-day Mississippi and Louisiana further established Louisiana as a French possession. One such fort, Fort La Boule, lay just south of the future site of the city of New Orleans. When Iberville died of yellow fever, his younger brother, Jean-Baptiste Le Moyne Sieur du Bienville, continued his work. So it says the port of New Orleans. So ships anchored at the port of New Orleans in about 1800. So there's a picture of that. In 1701, Bienville became governor of Louisiana at the age of 21. He built Fort Louis on Mobile Bay and lived there until 1711. In 1718, Bienville founded New Orleans. The Louisiana Territory was much easier to farm than the rest of New France. Settlers built plantations on the fertile soil and grew indigo, rice, and tobacco. Successful plantations brought in more money from trade with Native Americans, which allowed the farmers to increase the size of their plantations. The growing plantations required more and more workers. In 1720, a ship carrying about 200 enslaved Africans landed in New Orleans. In the decade that followed, the colony imported more than 6,000 enslaved Africans. Eventually, more than half of the people of New Orleans were enslaved Africans. So eventually the African slaves outnumbered the people that actually were living there, the settlers that were there. New alliances, new conflict. As European colonial powers sought to rapidly expand in North America, they came into contact with more and more native peoples. Reactions to the Europeans varied. Some groups of Native Americans were friendly, and some were not friendly. Before the Europeans arrived, the people living in North America already traded with one another, had military agreements, and shared cultures. The settlers' arrival often complicated the existing relationships between groups of Native Americans. In 1609, Huron and Algonquin leaders approached Samuel de Champlain, asking to form a military alliance. The Huron and Algonquin had long been enemies of the Iroquois. Eventually, Algonquin commanders convinced Champlain to lend them French troops in their fight with the Iroquois. Iroquois armies did not yet have guns and gunpowder. As a result, Champlain's men easily defeated the Iroquois. To thank the French, the Huron and Algonquin helped grow French fur traders' business in the region. After the battle with the Iroquois, France formed a permanent alliance with the Huron and Algonquin. The Iroquois Confederacy, meanwhile, sought revenge. So here is just a picture of a colonial trading port or post. And then at the top here, we have these French soldiers alongside Huron warriors. So the Iroquois wanted to expand their territory and regain control of the fur trade in eastern North America. The fur trade was important to the economy of the region, especially beaver fur. To achieve this goal, they engaged in a series of conflicts with the Huron, Algonquin, and French, beginning in about 1640 and ending in 1701, so about 60 years. Because of a severe decline in the beaver population, these conflicts became known as the Beaver Wars. In 1642, the Iroquois blocked the Huron from accessing the rivers they used to trade with the French and the other native peoples. The Huron economy had become dependent on trade. The Huron nearly starved as a result of the Iroquois' blockade. And by 1649, the Iroquois had defeated the Huron. The Iroquois' conflicts with the French and Algonquin would continue well into the 18th century.